Okay, while people are joining, we'll just do a round of introductions. We've got a slew of folks from the network office here. I'm Marty Downs. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of the LTER network office, which means I manage all the day-to-day activities of the office. Ben, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ben Halpern. I'm the executive director of the LTR network office. I use he, him pronouns, and I help work with this awesome team to make sure everything keeps moving forward in great ways. Glad to be here.
Nick?
Yeah, I'm Nick Lyon. I use they, them pronouns. I'm one of the two on-staff data scientists at the network office, which are an important part of working group support, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
And Gabe.
And I'm Gabe De La Rosa. I run digital communications here at the network office. So the newsletter, website, everything you see from us, and use he, him pronouns.
Great, thanks so much. And we're just going to dive right in. So I will share my screen, which of course rearranges all my Zoom windows, which I hate. Okay. So we're talking today about the RFP, the request for proposals for LTER funded synthesis working groups. The proposal deadline this year is June 26th, and the link to all of the information, including the formal RFP, will show up several times in the presentation. We'll also make these slides and the recording available on the website within a couple of days for folks who couldn't make it today. Super quick review for those who are not intimately familiar with the LTER network. 27 sites across a whole range of ecosystem types. The LTER network office, which coordinates collaboration, synthesis, and engagement across the network, as well as DEI, is hosted at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and NCEAS has now almost 30 years of synthesis experience. Data from the LTER network is focused in 5 core biophysical areas, as well as human environment interactions at many sites. Those are primary production, organic matter movement, nutrient cycling, populations, and disturbance, which means that every site collects some information in all of those areas. Some focus more in some areas than others, but if you're interested in doing comparisons across multiple sites, which is a lot of what this work is about, as well as using LTER data to sort of deepen insight around data sets that have a broader range. Those are the primary areas where you're going to find the most information. All of that 40 years of data is available at the Environmental Data Initiative, as well as, when data is collected in sort of more specific areas that are better represented in other repositories, it's always findable through Data One. So how are we defining synthesis? There's a lot of different ways to think about synthesis, but for the purposes of this opportunity, synthesis is bringing together the results of multiple studies, typically going back to the data itself to test novel hypotheses. And again, for the considerations of this RFP, it's done in a group. We support group synthesis for a number of reasons. You can have people involved in your group that are intimately familiar with the particular data sources and anything that might be a little weird or funky about it. You can incorporate a diverse set of skills and perspectives. So experimentalists, modelers, statistical analyses that you might not have in your own toolbox, but you can invite people that are quite skilled in that work. Many hands make light work. bringing a large group of, or a moderately sized group of people together, spreads the work around and makes sure that someone is always keeping things moving. And it's also a chance for more senior advanced researchers to share their skills with people who are developing those skills. So what's the synthesis process look like? We're funding, this year we are funding only what we call full working group. So that's a sort of 3-meeting model. Next year we'll be funding, and last year we funded Spark working groups, which are single meeting working groups. So for the full working groups, typically 3 in-person meetings, a kickoff meeting with the LNO team right after you get funded, and then a bunch of virtual work in between those 3 meetings. If all you do is 3 meetings, it's pretty hard to make serious progress. And then a phase after the last meeting that is about publication and data preservation. And we have analytical support to help you all the way through that process. Both the LNO and NCs have a lot of experience doing working groups, and we've gathered a lot of the resources and materials in these 2 web pages. The LNO synthesis resources are particularly adapted to how we manage working groups, which has a lot of overlap with how NCs manages working groups. I think you'll find both set of resources useful. In particular for LNO working groups, NCs provides really excellent in-house virtual meeting facilities, travel and logistical support, local and remote access to analytical servers. For LTER working groups, the LNO handles the selection process, the extra support that you get from LNO data analysts, and of course, LNO budgeting. So what kind of proposal topics are we interested in? Most interested, of course, and sort of most accessible for folks are in those 5 core thematic areas, which I mentioned before, as well as the social ecological. Totally open to proposals that make good use of LTER data in other areas, though. So that's a great place to start, but don't let it limit your ambitions. As I mentioned, Spark working groups are a slightly different model. We'll be funding those next year. So for the next 5 years, we're planning a full proposal RFP in year 1, 3, and 5 of the LTER Network Office award, which starts in September. And then Spark proposals in years 2 and 4. So you should look for a very predictable sequence of opportunities over the next 5 years. Full proposals are typically 2 years in duration. This time out, we're funding 3 meetings. We expect them to be about 4-day meetings. I know sometimes that's not always possible, and up to about 15 people. You're doing a budget so that we can plan, but we're not assigning you 100,000, 110,000 of funds. We're just funding those meetings. We do expect prep and follow-up with virtual meetings between the in-person meetings. And typical goals for synthesis working groups would be papers, meeting presentations, synthesized data sets. We do want to make really sure that the data gets back into the public domain. Analysis packages, runs across the board, but for most working groups, the stock in trade is going to be papers and data sets. Just point of information for Spark proposals, there's a little more, we view them as sort of either the beginning or the end of a larger synthesis project. So on the exploratory end of things to figure out whether the data really gets you to where you think it's going to get. On the other end, there are, particularly post-COVID, there have been synthesis projects that have been running virtually for a couple of years sometimes and just need one in-person meeting to close the loop and get publications out. So both of those are reasonable kinds of proposals for Spark working groups, which will be open next year at about the same time. Who's eligible? Anyone in academic institution, research institutions, scientific societies, government or policy agencies, you can read the list, are eligible to propose synthesis working groups. One advantage of the synthesis working group model is that we're not giving you the money, we're paying for the work. So that means it's a great opportunity for instance, postdocs to propose a working group where they might struggle to get an independent award, to be a PI on an independent award through their institutions. It must include one or more LTER researchers. I struggle to think a little bit why you would want to propose an LTER working group without LTER researchers, but we try and be explicit about that. In terms of group composition, we have a lot of experience over the years with working groups at NCEAS, and there are a number of characteristics that are pretty important to putting together a really strong working group. This makes a ton of common sense, but people often forget that it's important to mix a deep knowledge of the literature and a broad view of the relevant fields, often represented by more senior people, with fresh eyes and novel perspectives. You want to be sure to include at least some people with strong technical skills, but that doesn't mean that everybody in the group has to be an amazing programmer. We do a lot of support around both learning reproducible techniques and also providing direct support for reproducible and scripted analyses. You want to make sure that you have people who are really available to devote some concentrated time to the project, and that often means people who have a strong incentive to get a product out of the project. And you want a mix of people who are emotionally astute. Again, doesn't have to be everybody in the mix, but you want to think about who's involved that sort of has some of those other qualities, softer skills and strong attention to detail, and a mix of fields, sort of not always just the usual suspects. You also want to remember that synthesis working groups are really valuable networking and career building opportunities. So we strongly encourage you to reserve a few spots for people who would not otherwise get those opportunities. Some working groups choose to accomplish that by reserving spots that are for participants who have not yet been determined at the time that they submit the proposal. That's a totally reasonable way to accomplish it, but please include in the proposal what the mechanism is. How are you going to do outreach? How are you going to choose those participants? We added, over the last couple of years, we've made sort of a few more explicit tables to describe who's involved in the project so that we have that information when the proposal comes in. So in addition to the 2,000-word project description, we're asking folks to submit a participant table that includes just first, last name, affiliation. Importantly, their expertise says it's relevant to the project, whether they're the PI, a data science liaison, a modeler, sort of what's their role with respect to the project, what's their career stage, and have they committed to the project? And we ask that you do that in the format of this table. This is all linked from the RFP, but I wanted to highlight that there are there's a specific format for this. For the data that you use, the one thing that's required is that you use LTER data from more than one site. But in addition to that, we welcome inclusion of data from other sources. So we've had a number of really successful synthesis working groups in the last couple of years that have used LTER data sets, NEON data sets, really across the board. The silica synthesis working group has, help me out here, Nick, 1,000 different stream data sets that are incorporated in their analysis. Is it that many, really?
I think it might actually be more than that.
That's what sticks in my head. So
I think
so
they have 3 continents.
yeah. LTR adds a depth that not all of those data sets have, but we welcome the connection across both broad and deep sources of data. We do require that derived data is documented and made publicly available in compliance with the Network Data Access Policy and the NC's Data and Information Policy. There are, of course, exceptions for Indigenous data sovereignty and time until publication and human subjects, but the bottom line expectation is that you will make your derived data public. And we provide strong data science support, helping you with collaborative tools, whether it's just email lists and shared drives and websites that help you coordinate the activities of your working group, helping you create and teaching you how to create reproducible and collaborative workflows, consulting on those workflows, so that, you know, oftentimes when people start a synthesis working group, they know what data is out there, or they think they know what data is out there. But there are many, many sources that you will discover in the process of your analysis. And when your workflow has been scripted, you're actually able to incorporate those additional sources of data without having to go back to the beginning. They'll help with data ingestion, harmonization, and wrangling. Can provide direct assistance with setting up those scripted analyses and give you access to NC's high-performance servers. And finally, help you with getting your derived data into public repositories. We have found with synthesis groups in the past that they often think the data that's available is one thing. And if they haven't looked closely at it, they discover once they get here that it's either not quite what they thought it was, or there are some constraints on its availability and the way they can use it. So when people are proposing synthesis groups, we ask that you spend a little time getting a look at the data that you think is there. We don't by any means expect that this data sources table is going to include every bit of data that you're going to use. But when you've identified it, just include it here. And this starts a practice for the whole rest of the working group, that you'll know where your data came from. You'll know what the level of access that you have to it is. You can sort of continue this process throughout the working group. So how many awards are we expecting to fund, and what do we cover? We're expecting 2 groups to be funded out of this competition with about a 2-year duration. We're not super strict on exactly 2 years, but we do have to plan. We pay for meeting travel, food and lodging, and publication costs when you don't have other sources of funding for those for open access publication costs. We don't fund field research or any collection of new data. We don't fund anything that would be spent at your home institution. So salary for your staff, your grad students, any of that. or activities that primarily address the goals of other organizations. We'll fund 3 meetings, up to about 15 researchers. We can be a little flexible on that with justification. We plan for about a 2-year span of working groups. We provide analyst support for 2 years. So there's a bit of incentive to wrap it up within the first couple of years. We recommend 4-day meetings when possible, just because it really helps keep the momentum going. I said budgets are for planning purposes, not a permanent allocation of funds. And we welcome partial support from institutions or agencies, but totally not required. The budget worksheet looks like this. The yellow blocks are the things that you fill in. Basically, we're trying to figure out where are your people coming from and about when do you think the meetings are going to happen. And the submission process, we ask that you fill in those tables, combine them into a single PDF, and submit by June 26th at 5 p.m. And I will emphasize Pacific time. The admin folks at NCEAS really like to get them all in one day. They will send you an email acknowledging the receipt of your proposal. So if you think you've submitted something and you haven't gotten that email out, reach out to either proposals@LTERnet or directly to me, downs@nceas.ucsb.edu. Proposal should include a cover sheet that's detailed in the RFP, the proposal body less than 2,000 words, but we don't count figures, tables, references, or biosketches. Your references, of course, your table of data sources, your participant table, your budget, and biosketches. Any federal agency format is fine for biosketches. I think most of you will have NSF biosketches. Key dates. Today is the informational webinar. As I said, we'll get the recording up within a couple of days. The proposal's due June 26th. We're planning to announce awards in August, and projects are welcome to begin in September. This is a tight timeline, and it would be great if projects could get started soon. So we are asking folks to include, as part of the proposal, their proposed first meeting date. That's often a stumbling block that keeps people from getting started quickly, is that it takes 3 or 4, 6 months to find a time when everyone can get together. When you gather your group, try and identify what that first week is. The review process, proposals. We assemble a review panel that includes an even mix of LTER and non-LTER scientists. Each proposal is read by at least 3 reviewers and discussed by the whole panel. They're evaluated for scientific merit, contribution to, and use of LTER network science. Does your team have the needed expertise? Does it include a range of perspectives? And is the scope reasonable and the work plan feasible? Final decision on funding is made by the LNO Executive Director in consultation with the chair of the LTER Executive Board. Just a few tips on writing a good proposal. They're evaluated primarily on the significance and the novelty of the idea, and they should be question-driven, not descriptive. Of course, we want a clear rationale for using LTER data and what that long-term data adds to the work that you're proposing. Be as clear and concise as possible. They're 2,000 words, and you can write a good justification in 2,000 words, but you have to use them wisely. Be sure to include participants who are really committed to the project and have incentive to get products out of it, and strive to include participants from historically excluded institutions and identities. Be sure to indicate the source of the data used and confirm its availability and its fitness. So any questions? I will stop sharing and open up the floor. I can find the Q&A. So you can either raise your hand, put a question in the chat, or put it in the Q&A. Right, while folks are thinking about that, Nick, do you want to take a minute to sort of describe the analytical support that we offer?
Yeah, totally. So I think for each group, we do a lot of sort of tailoring to that group's needs. And I think a useful analogy is that the group members are sort of master architects. You have this like wealth of discipline and domain-specific knowledge, potentially across multiple disciplines, but not necessarily a ton of coding knowledge as well, though that's awesome if you have it. So while you all are sort of like drafting the blueprint for the home, you can refer to I and my colleague Angel Chen, who's in the same role, and we're sort of like a master carpenter. We're really good at what we do, but it's sort of a different scope. And so you think, the dining room needs to look like this, and you can either tell us, I want a table, 4 legs, good to go. Everything else is up to you. Or you could give us a ton of specifications on sort of exactly how you wanted that to look. Or, and if I can just torture this metaphor a little bit more, we could provide you guidance as you build the table. And anything along that sort of advising to writing for/with you continuum is totally acceptable. And each group sort of picks what feels right to them. And I assume we can share this link with the asynchronous people, but we do have a website that I just put in the chat that is sort of all things scientific computing, including the workshops that we offer for groups, and also like short blurbs about the more specific types of support that we can offer. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Mhm.
Gabe, you want to say a little bit about the communications role?
Yeah, totally. So my role comes in much later than Nick's. Usually once finished products are coming out is when I get involved. But I've done a number of things for groups, most often sort of figure design. I have a lot of graphic design skills and a big toolkit that a lot of groups sometimes don't have. And we've been able to sort of go through figure development all the way from, just making a nice looking conceptual graph all the way to sort of a model ecosystem conceptual figure with lots of arrows and different things happening. But I've also assisted groups with sort of consulting on how to communicate their work. So I know that area really well. We have a bunch of channels through the LNO, but there's lots of other ways to get the word out. And so it's a really fun process, and hopefully I can make your results, hit a little bit harder through my assistance.
Great, thanks. All right. Any questions from folks?